Story Corner, presented by Jennifer. G. Yin and Yu, Part 2. Neither of Yin's parents said a word until they could no longer see Kura's house. "What are we going to do?" Yin's mother asked as they climbed the mountain road. "There's nothing we can do," her father answered. He refused to look at Yin. "I feel horrible about it." "But what about the cure?" Yin asked. She heard about the cure. "It's too expensive," Yin's mother said. "Besides, it probably won't work," her father added. "But we have to try," Yin said. "We can't afford it. We'd lose the farm. We'd lose everything," Yin's father said it quietly, still refusing to look at her. She could see his bottom lip trembling. "What about the Sword of Tang?" Yin suggested, but there was no answer from her parents. The ancient sword was the most expensive thing her family owned. In fact, it was priceless. The sword had been in the family for thousands of years. It carried with it a history of pride and power. Though Ian's family was poor, there was nobility in their blood. Her father had always said that the sword was proof the family would prosper again. The Sword of Tang had its own destiny. One day it would save the family. "Maybe this is the Sword of Tang's destiny," Yin offered in a pleading voice. Her father shook his head. "Out of the question." "But, Father, how can you be sure?" "That sword is what gives me my title," he said. "It's what ensures that you will have a well-born husband one day and will be taken care of after I'm gone. The Sword of Tang is about the future, Yin, not the present." "I don't want a husband. I want a brother," Yin screamed. She had wanted to scream all day. Yin and her brother were the future of the family. Didn't that mean that the sword belonged to them? "When you're older, you'll understand," Yin's mother said. She placed a hand on Yu's back, rubbing it gently. "I understand now," Yin said, tears filling her eyes. "I want you to get better." Yin's mother pulled her close and surprised Yin by beginning to cry herself in deep sobs. They sounded as painful as Yu's coughing. Climbing up the mountain road was much harder than traveling down, even in the daylight. By the time the family got home, it was almost evening again, and they were all exhausted. Yin had hoped that during the long journey, her mother and father would realize their mistake and consider buying the cure from healer Kira. But when they were finally home, Yin's father sent her to bed early with a tone that left no room for argument. It was clear he had made up his mind. they were letting her brother die. That night, Yin listened with Laura for her parents to go to sleep. They waited until Taryn was on the other side of the house rooting out mice. Then, when they were sure everything was quiet, Yin rose from her bed and crept out of her room with Laura balanced on her shoulder. She snuck into her parents' room, matching her steps to the sound of her father's snoring. She moved slowly to the far side of their bed. There, in the center of a small table, was a long parcel wrapped reverently in fine layers of silk. With only a single glance at her parents' bed, Yin swept the parcel into her hands and moved as quickly as she dared back across the room. Her every step seemed to creak in the tiny echoing chamber. Right as she was about to reach for the door, Yin's father stirred, letting out a loud, surprised grunt. Yin froze. "I've been caught." But a moment later he mumbled something quiet and incomprehensible. Yin heard the bed creak behind her as her father rolled over in his sleep. She moved swiftly from the room, the sword of Tang clutched in her hands. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Yin asked Laura once they were out of the farmyard under the moon. It felt like she was asking herself. The little bird flapped his white and black wings in the grass, then flew up to perch on the sword's ancient handle. Even without being polished, the blade shone in the moonlight. "Do you remember the way?" Yin asked her spirit animal. Laura flew ahead of the girl down the mountain road. It was too dark to see clearly, and Yin hadn't thought to bring a torch. The sword already felt heavy in her arms. She labored under its weight, careful not to trip on the stones in the road. Yin lost track of the time as she walked. She had no sense of how much further she had to carry the sword in secret. She refused to rest until she absolutely could not take another step. Finally, that moment came, and Yin collapsed onto the ground. She sat there in the dark with Laura listening to the forest. "Do you ever wish you were without me?" she asked the starling. "Do you wish you'd been bonded to some other girl with a better life?" She didn't expect him to answer her, but the bird opened his beak and let out a sweet song. Yin had only heard his screams, his whines, and the terrible sound Luna made to get her attention. She had never heard him sing so splendidly. It filled her heart with hope. She knew she was doing the right thing. Yin got up and started walking again. She was ready to be brave, even if her parents weren't. When Yin arrived at the healer's village, it was still late. There were many hours left before daybreak. Yin knew it wasn't safe traveling alone this late at night. She had the sword to protect her, but she was too weak and untrained to wield it properly. If anyone found the girl alone in the dark, they could easily steal it. Then Yin would have nothing. She had to be careful. Laura flew ahead of Yin, her brave scout. And yet, with every step, Yin felt like she might be walking into a trap. She imagined that she was hearing voices, men and women in the shadows plotting to charge her. She looked behind her into the dark. No one was there, and yet it sounded like people were running towards her. When she faced forward, Luna flew back to her. It was starting to rain. First gently, then all at once. Rainwater filled the streets with mountain mud. Her dress was getting muddier with every step. It would be obvious to Yin's parents that she had betrayed them, but it was too late to turn back. She had come too far and all on her own. Yin knocked at Kira's door, and Laura let out an impatient squawk. As they waited, Yin and Laura asked Laura to sleep again on her arm. The bird bristled with indignation. He flew to her outstretched arm, but instead of doing as Yin asked, Laura pecked at her skin defiantly. "Ouch!" Yin cried, startled. "That pinches!" Laura cried out too, but did as Yin asked, disappearing into a blur of motion. Kira opened the door wide as if she had been expecting the girl all along. In her hand was a large lit candle. "You are very brave indeed," the healer told Yin. "I've come to buy you's cure," she told the woman, revealing the sword of Tang. Kira leaned in with the candle, and the wet sword gleamed like a hungry flame. "My child," Kira said, "this sword is much too valuable to trade. I could never accept such a prize as payment." "But you must," Yin begged her. "It's all I have." "Your father could not have allowed it," Kira said. "It's my sword to give, not his," the girl protested. Kira stared at her a long while with steady eyes. Yin had heard about the healer's gaze, that the woman was a master at intuning what was inside a person. But Yin was telling the truth, so she stared right back. "I will sell you my strongest cure," the woman told Yin, "and will take your sword as payment. I will keep it safe for you. Perhaps one day you'll come back for it. I'll return it to you then, for a fair price." "You are an honorable woman," Yin said to Kira. Tenzin, the healer's red panda, climbed up the woman's arm and perched like a monkey on her shoulder, his striped tail curling behind her neck. "Not nearly as honorable as you are courageous," Kira said, handing Yin a small vial of dark liquid. It coated the glass thick as blood. "Thank you," Yin said, hugging the old woman. "A million times thank you." Kira frowned at the girl's delighted face. "What is in that bottle is a chance, not a miracle," she warned. "His favor will break by morning, or not at all." But it felt like a miracle to Yin. She turned from the door, ready to run home to her brother before morning. "Be sure to tell your parents what I said," the healer called behind her. "As long as I'm alive, the sword of Tang will be waiting here for you." Yin gripped the vial hard in her fist and ran through the rain, out of the village and up the mountain road. She was no longer scared of robbers or of tripping on stones. She felt like she herself could fly, spry as her spirit animal, dodging the raindrops. She would have sung if she weren't using every breath in her body to get home. Yin was soaked to the bones when she arrived home, the vial hot in her hand. She rushed into her brother's room and woke him. Her hair was still dripping down her face. "Drink this," she said, uncorking the potion and holding it to the boy's dried lips. "You should be better by breakfast," she told him. "It smells," he said, but he drank Kira's cure in one gulp. He coughed, then put his hands to his chest, like he felt something working inside. Yin smiled, hoping it was the medicine. "Sleep now," Yin said to her brother. Yu kissed his sister on her cold cheek. He lay back down and closed his eyes, sniffling but smiling. Yin watched him for a long moment before she changed out of her wet clothes and crept into her warm, dry bed. She considered waking Luna just to say good night, and to thank him for being such a brave companion. But she fell asleep as soon as the thought crossed her mind.